Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending on where you're calling in from. I'm Nancy Narden, and I'm excited to have with me today Jerry Pharr. He's the Director of Global Sales Enablement for Redis Labs. And I think we're going to kind of just jump into things. First, let me say welcome, Jerry.
Hi, good, great to be here, Nancy, and welcome everyone.
Great to have you here. Jerry is one of the founding members of the Sales Enablement Society, which many of you on the call may be familiar with. This week actually is Sales Enablement Week. We should actually, coin that phrase, right? Because it is. The Sales Enablement Society had a 3-day conference. And in fact, Jerry, you spoke at that. Was that yesterday that you spoke?
I did. I had a session yesterday afternoon talking about something very similar we're talking about today, actually.
Great. Well, it's an interesting topic, and what I'm excited about is that you're going to share some very specific tips and even a framework that sales enablement people and anyone that needs to can use themselves to make sure that call coaching or just sales coaching, helps to lead to win rates, but most importantly, that it's scalable and that it's manager led and that it's practical as well. Now, you use Chorus for a number of pieces of your framework. So I'm sure you'll be talking somewhat about how Chorus helps you with that. But this is going to be kind of a general discussion as well. And so I do want people to feel free to unmute themselves and ask a question or to put it into the side panel if you prefer. If you're more comfortable just typing it in, that's fine too. But let's make it interactive because Jerry's got a lot of things to share and I'm sure you're going to have some questions. So let me just switch screens here to talk about some of the topics that we'll be covering, not necessarily in this order. And this is the only slide I think that we're going to show, although Jerry has some examples that he'll be showing, but it's not going to be a PowerPoint. It's going to be a discussion. So Jerry, let's talk about this concept of actionable coaching. Right? What does that mean to you and why is that important?
Well, I think now I've been around this sales organizations for about a dozen years now. First, about 6 years as a seller and then 6 years as in sales enablement leadership role. And, I've come to learn that the best way to scale a sales enablement function is to focus on enabling managers, perhaps even more so than enabling sellers themselves. And there's a lot of data out there that suggests that one of the biggest impact you can have as a manager is to just do actual skill coaching, soft skill coaching. And most of the managers I've worked with, they agree with that. They would love to coach. They'd love to be able to do that, but they just don't know how. They don't know the details of what to actually do. So, sure, you put me in a meeting with my rep. I want to coach, but what should I be looking at? What data should I use? What should I focus on? Those kinds of things. So I see it as sort of, our job as enablement folks to equip them with the data, the framework, the tools and resources and knowledge necessary to have those great coaching conversations that is applicable and sort of in line with what the seller's actually doing, like talking about actual deals they're working, actual conversations they're having. So making it actionable both for the rep because they're working on a deal they're working on, and actionable for the manager so that they actually know what to do and say during those conversations.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting because often when I think of sales enablement, I'm thinking about enabling the sellers, the sales reps. So you bring up a really good point that you have to be able to enable the managers so that they can enable the sellers as well. And I'm sure you have a lot of programs that are aimed at enabling the sellers, but the whole helping managers know how to coach is really key. And I think about that they don't necessarily know how, but also they would probably, if left to themselves, all do it differently from each other. So I guess that leads to the next point about consistency. Do you find that having a framework so that every manager and actually is that what you do, right? You have a framework so that every manager can coach in the same way so that you can then collect data. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, totally. So one of the ways I see my job as a whole is about um, helping drive more predictable revenue for the business. And among the ways you do that is producing consistency and more consistent processes and tools and systems, so that you think of it as sort of like a machine. I want to know that regardless of the raw materials I put in this end, I want to know with consistency and predictability what's coming out the other end. And so my job is to figure out what that machine is, so that when I put in the raw materials, I know what to get. And so everything I do, I try to have a consistent framework and methodology and process for what sellers are doing, what managers are doing, what sales ops is doing, what sales enablement is doing. Um, and you get, obviously you're not going to get 100% adoption on everything you do, but you hope for the best. And that's why, if you do get consistency, that's how you're going to get better sort of metrics and say that was effective and that wasn't.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So actually, I just want to comment from some of the conversations you and I have had in the past. It's clear that you're very much a systems and process thinker, which takes a lot of work and a lot of commitment. So I appreciate the fact that you're going to share the framework that you use, because I know that required a lot of time on your part. And it's going to shortcut things for the people that are on the call by being able to use the framework. If not for a starting point, then, you know, to be able to customize it themselves. They may even be able to use it as it is. But you have a framework for all coaching. This is going to be kind of zeroed in on discovery call coaching a little bit. But talk about the overall coaching platform that you put together.
Sure. So our enablement team earlier this year, starting around January, had a series of conversations, in-depth interviews with our sales leadership, frontline managers, and sales reps, saying, what do you see some of the biggest knowledge or skill gaps? And then how can we as an enablement team support those and kind of address those concerns? And so we came up with the kind of 3 or 4 different categories of things they wanted to address. So there were things like having a better, more structured onboarding program for new reps. Then there was one that was around sort of account strategy. So we have named accounts for reps. So making sure they're doing a sort of great job of having a written account plan, account strategy, and mapping out the tactics they're going to use with their SDR and their SA and that kind of thing. The third one was around, once you get an opportunity with that account, are you ensuring that you're having a great values-based conversation in the discovery calls and talking about value instead of features and functions? And then the last one was around later stage opportunities. What can we do to ensure that we're mitigating all the risks and making sure we're engaging all the right stakeholders and that sort of thing? So they're kind of 4 different buckets of things they wanted us to do. So we said, all right, well, the onboarding program, that's kind of a separate thing. But the other 3, let's build a coaching program around that addresses those 3 things. And so what we ultimately did is, since one of our guiding principles was we're enabling managers to coach rather than coaching ourselves, we said, let's ensure that those frontline managers are having a recurring one-on-one coaching sessions with each of their reps. And then during those one-on-one coaching sessions, they're focusing on one of those 3 coaching paths, either the account strategy or early stage discovery or late stage opportunity strategy. And so it's our job as an enablement team to put structure and content and data around each of those regarding what they're going to choose. The conversation today is kind of focused primarily on that discovery phase, when if they choose to focus on that coaching path, helping the sellers do better discovery calls. That's what I created a framework for that, saying, hey, here's how you should do great discovery calls, and here's how you coach on it.
All right. So the takeaway, I think, from that is for people to sit down with their sales leaders and say, what's important and how can we group those into natural categories so that you, as a sales enablement leader, can build a coaching program around that.
That's right.
That's a good place to start. All right. So discovery call coaching. Let's talk about, well, we actually are kind of following the order here on the topics, but what would you say are some of the key metrics that you look for discovery call coaching? And how
So,
do sales leaders, sorry, how do they know
oh,
what, yeah, the metrics I imagine are standardized, right? That's the whole point.
that's right. That's right. So we were saying, if we're going to have a lift, what is that? What are the metrics we want to, we want to have move the needle on? So first one was around stage advancement rates. So, you have that discovery call, it's in the opportunity stage one. What percent of opportunities advance to that second stage? It's not the only criterion, but sort of an important one to paying attention to. And what's the lift we can get there? Second one is around, for us, it was competitive win rates, because one of the big things we're focusing on during those discovery calls is not just ensuring we are understanding their sort of big business drivers and aligning our solution to it, but also differentiating ourselves from the other solutions they could choose from. And if this assumption being, if they're doing a good job of differentiating during these discovery calls, we should have a better way of kind of have better win rates down the road. So we monitor overall competitive win rates. The third one is senior stakeholders. So it's another thing we wanted to focus on, is since we're trying to sell business value, not just features and functions, presumably that would allow us to have conversations with higher level folks in the influence group on the buyer's end. So we look at, of all the opportunities where you're working, what percent of them have, say, call it director level involved in the contact role in Salesforce, that kind of thing. And presumably that number would go up. So those are kind of the three ones that are our CRO cares about, for example. And the fourth one is really just, we have a framework for grading each of the calls. And you can get an average score of between 0 and 5, and we want to make sure that average score is going up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess what you want to do then is think about what are the metrics that are indicators, really, right? So what are the leading indicators that a deal will come in? And I think that's been difficult historically for companies, because they tend to only know how they did by whether or not they hit quota for that month or that period. So if you can find some leading indicators that are measurable and that tell you, look, if we can check these boxes, we have a pretty good chance of getting that deal.
Yeah.
And it probably leads us to the discovery call part, because, or just really any call analysis, because the call analysis, well, describe that. Like when you're listening to a call, what does that conversation tell you?
Well, it tells you whether the degree to which the rep is using sort of best practices. Are they really trying to discover kind of business level problems? Are they really kind of articulating the value of us and our solutions and how they're differentiated? Are they really sort of being empathetic and practicing active listening and all those kinds of things? Now, if you come up with, if you wrote down a list of all the things you think that are great things to do in discovery call, you could have 150 of them. But what we did is we said, let's as a sales organization, let's agree on what we think for our purposes are the best practices. So we created a document that documents those things. This is what we think should happen in a call. And I think that sort of shared understanding it's really hard to get to, but it's essential. If you're going to have any kind of call coaching program, you have to agree on what good is. And so that was the biggest hurdle for us, but I'm very, very pleased with what we ended up with.
Well, it's interesting, because if you do nothing else but agree to what good looks like, then that probably gets you a long way from where you are today. Because I would imagine many sales organizations just don't get to that point because they're just busy with activities. So that's good. I do want to make a clarification here in terms of what chorus is, because that's probably important to know. So chorus, well, actually, let me have you describe what chorus is.
Sure. So Chorus is a call analytics and call intelligence platform. So it records and transcribes sales calls, but it also, using its own AI algorithms, kind of presents insights that you may not be aware of, and it sort of presents potential risks that might be going on, or noticing trends that you may not have known. Like, here's the sort of negative sentiments that are expressed regularly during this call. Hey, you might want to pay attention to that. Or your deal's at this stage and you haven't discussed pricing or something like that. So they can present those insights that can be really, really valuable. And in a discovery call situation, you can also sort of tell it to be listening for high level business value. Are we talking about these kinds of business drivers and corporate objectives instead of just sort of feature function kind of thing? So it's been sort of an essential tool for us in implementing this program. Now, I will want to say that I know that sales coaching programs take any sort of, there are infinite number of ways you can approach it. Our particular way of doing it is focusing on discovery call conversations, and our even more specific way of doing that is recording those calls and then having a conversation about those calls, comparing it to this set of sort of best practices that we've identified.
Mm-hmm. And then if the managers can coach so that each one of those calls then get better and better over time, then presumably you have better and better outcomes. So I can see why that would be the key to facilitating this whole process. Well, you want to jump into what how you do
Sure.
some of this?
Sure. Let me share my screen here.
Okay.
All right, desktop 2. Make sure I'm not sharing my Spotify with you.
There we go.
Great. So this is that framework I was describing. You'll see that it's really long, 19 pages. It's a meaty document, but this is our shared understanding of what sort of can and should happen in this. We call it initial meetings. It's sort of similar to a discovery call, but we just call it initial meetings. And you'll see that this kind of graphic shows the flow of a discovery call. I want to go to one particular page here. This is kind of a one-page snapshot, and I'll zoom in just a tad right there. So this, obviously the whole thing is 19 pages, so it's a lot of stuff, but this summarizes the whole thing. And if you look at the kind of phases here, there's nothing especially innovative. It's just, here's what you do before a call. Then during the call, here's some ideas for introduction. Here's some ideas for doing discovery. Then here's ideas for talking about us. And then, closing with next steps. And then here's what you do after the call. So nothing magical or innovative there. But what we end up doing that proved valuable is for each of these bullets on here, we created kind of sample questions to ask. What if you do want to start asking about, for example, business drivers, so those sort of external drivers that influence their business? What are some sample questions you could ask? If you want to ask about what are the negative consequences, you're having these challenges and these pains, tell me about the impact on your business. So just give actual examples of questions you could ask. So we sort of approach this as a bunch of arrows you can put in your quiver. Now you'll notice there are a bunch of bullets here, and it's 19 pages worth of content for those bullets. So there's no way that anybody can or should do everything on here. In fact, if a rep tried to do everything on here, it would be a terrible, terrible experience, both for the customer and for the rep. It would probably like a 2.5-hour call, who knows? But the idea is that, if it's using your judgment, if it does feel right to ask about these particular kinds of things, we wanted to present some kind of some ideas for you. So that's the if you kind of scroll down, you'd see a bunch of meat on the ways different ask those kinds of questions. So that's the framework as a whole, and it's again 19 pages. But the way this is implemented is, so we train reps on a framework like this, and then they incorporate this stuff into their discovery calls. And then after those calls, they have a recurring one-on-one coaching session with their manager. And during those coaching sessions, the manager they're playing that recording from Chorus live. They're clicking play and pause. Hey, I love how you went this way. Tell me about why you went that way instead of this way, that kind of thing, and asking questions and providing feedback along the way. And then at the end of that coaching session, the manager is actually entering a grade. They're sort of evaluating each of those calls numerically. So if you're going to grade a call, you do have to agree on what are the criteria you're grading on, right? So this is another sort of challenge for us, was saying, all right, of all the stuff on here, all the 19 pages worth of stuff, what are we actually going to grade on? And so we ended up creating kind of this right here. These are the scoring criteria. So there are 10 of them, 10 items. And we basically said, at the end of the call, at the end of the coaching session, the manager is going to go into Chorus and enter a grade for each of these on this pre-call research. They're going to grade it on a scale of 1 to 5, call opening scale of 1 to 5, and so on and so forth. So scale of 1 to 5 for each of these. And so as you might imagine, it was tough to get everyone aligned on what these things are that we're kind of grading on. I do feel pretty good about where we landed. We might this might evolve and we'll change, reduce the number or something like that. But for right now, I think it's serving its purpose, it's doing a pretty good job. And then, so the way this actually appears in the platform in Chorus, oh, it's not there, it's over here. So you'll see that this is a GIF flowing through, so it's going to cycle through. But you'll see that if a manager's looking at a call, they click on scorecards and they're actually entering the grades in the platform for each of those. There's the initial meeting framework, and then all 10 of those are actually listed there. And you just click, okay, I'm going to go in this one a 2, this one a 4, this one a 5, that kind of thing, and enter any comments on it. So that's kind of what they're doing right now. I will say the one thing we have not addressed yet that will probably end up being sort of a version 2 of this is there might be questions out there that say, hey, all right, Jerry, I get that you've got these 10 criteria, but how do we ensure that manager 1 understands this in the same way that manager 2 does? So manager 1 might give it, a 3 out of 5, but manager 2 might give it a 5 out of 5. And I can see that there is that possibility right now. We have not solved for it, but ultimately what I would like to do is for each of these criteria, make it actually a true rubric that says, okay, there'd be columns over here for each number. A 1 looks like this, a 2 looks like this, a 3 looks like that kind of thing. So that's kind of how this, I'm hoping, would evolve to address that problem of consistency from manager to manager.
Can I stop you there and ask you to go back to that last page? Because my question is, so how is the manager doing this? Did they presumably they just listen to the entire call and then they go through this? Do they go through this as they're listening to the call?
Yeah, so we do suggest that they listen to the call prior to the coaching session and enter their comments and their grades prior to the coaching session. And then during the session, you're listening to it again, probably on a higher speed. You can play it at 1.5 speed or something. And doing that, the benefit of at least listening to it beforehand is that you come to the meeting with a hypothesis on what you want to focus on and what are sort of the needs identified and that kind of thing. And then during the call, you're just listening to it and then you're saying, hey, here's the grades I gave and why. Now, some managers do that, some don't. Some will actually not actually enter the grades until the coaching session itself. We prefer to listen and enter the grades before, but some do, some don't.
Okay, so the managers do that work, which it's a fair amount of work, but it's coaching. It's called coaching.
Yeah.
Right. So they're going to need to do that. And you made it so that they don't have to figure out, well, what's the best way to coach this particular call. You've given them some criteria.
Yeah.
So so typically, do they just listen to one call a week? And how do they know which call to listen to?
Yeah. So I can probably stop sharing now. So they have the coaching sessions as recurring meetings on their calendars. So every 2 weeks. And I'm sorry, not every 2 weeks. It's actually twice a month, not every 2 weeks. So the first and third week of the month. And so during that coaching session with one rep, you're only focusing on one call. Now, because I think that's kind of where the gold is listening to the actual call during that coaching session and playing and pushing pause. And so, when their manager shows the grades they put in the comments, the rep actually understands why, because they talked about it as the call was progressing there. Now, there is a way in Chorus to show kind of overall analytics for a rep that are not specific to this one call, but for how they're doing overall. Like, are they, how often are they talking about competitors? How often, what's the talk listen ratio, those kinds of things. And we do coach the managers on how to look at those things as well. So look at the overall trend lines for a rep and the content of the specific call during that coaching session.
Mm-hmm. I did get a question. Someone was asking whether we would be sharing this document. And as I said, this took a lot of time and expertise and work to put together. So Jerry has kindly agreed to share that first frame.
Yeah, I will share that that one-page screenshot, the one-page snapshot here, but I can't really share the whole thing.
Understandably. Yep, understandably. But that is really the roadmap. So people should be able to take that. The first step, I would imagine, is to fine tune it for themselves. First of all the arrows across the top, are those the same things that we would want to use? And then are those the same bullets that we would want to use? And you've got a tremendous head start because now you can just tweak it. And then you're going to want to go and create a page or an expanded section anyway for each of those bullets. And honestly, I think going through that process yourself to come up with that is probably worth as much almost as having it finished, because it forces you to ask some pretty important questions and get agreement on. Also, we are recording this session, so you'll get a link to the recording. Sorry, Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that has surprised me both in this job and my last company where we did something similar, just that sure, you're going to get, disagreement on little points here and there, like that should be in the framework and that should kind of thing. But overall, the feedback has been, wow, that's exactly right. I've never seen it sort of packaged up like that. So everyone just says, yeah, the best practices that most people understand and agree to, just putting on a document. So that's been one of the greatest benefits is just shared understanding.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a few minutes left. I would like you to just talk about Chorus for a second in terms of adoption and implementation. Yeah. You did mention you use this at another company, and I think that speaks for itself. When you went to the next company, you brought Chorus in because obviously it helped
I've been a customer for, I think I've been a customer for 4 years now, something like that. So definitely a fan. I worked at Outreach for 3 years. So I have to say that, the number one sales technology in my stack is Outreach. The second one I would say is Chorus. As an enablement person who focuses a great deal and puts a lot of value in coaching, I don't think I could do it without something like Chorus.
Well, that was going to be my last question, which is, what if someone said, look, you can't have it anymore. I'm going to take it away from you. What would you say?
I'd say, I can probably get interviews next week for other companies.
Good response. I mean, seriously, you couldn't do the work you're doing. You could not enable the managers to coach better and for the reps to improve over time without it, because the
alternative to this is having managers join actual live calls, and everyone knows that's just not scalable.
Good point.
And it's not just the recording. It's actually also the insights and analytics that you would not get at all.
Mm-hmm. All right. Back to the implementation question. What's involved in that?
Getting it turned on is basically nothing, because all you're doing is you're syncing Chorus with your calendar and you're syncing it with Salesforce. And then once you do those things, it automatically joins the call. So from a rep perspective, they don't literally have to do anything. It just joins and then does its own magic. But getting managers and reps to use it in a way that I recommend, that just takes some sort of training and coaching. And that's usually kind of a few month process.
Sure. So have a commitment that you're going to get the most out of it, but actually using it and getting adoption for it, there's nothing required, because as you say, it joins the call automatically.
That's right.
I will say I use Chorus myself, and Although I don't necessarily have to analyze my calls, I do listen back to them because it reminds me of what the customer said, right? And that's always
Mhm.
hard to remember. You can't, your notes don't do it, don't do the job. And if you did take notes, you would want to listen so that you could fill in the missing pieces of what that note meant. And I will also often share that recording with the customer because presumably we had a good conversation and they'll want to be reminded of it as well. And that helps with internal selling too. I'm just curious if your reps do any of the recording sharing with your prospects or customers.
They do. They're starting to get requests, and I don't think they do it proactively, but once the customer sees, okay, I hear this being recorded, and okay, I can see how this would be valuable. And if you think about it, if they're evaluating solutions to potentially purchase. I know I buy stuff all the time, and I want to remember what I was listening, what the sales rep was telling me, right? So it's useful for me as a buyer to have that as a reference. So yeah.
Mhm. Good. Well, with that, we are out of time. I try to keep this prompt in terms of the start and end time. Jerry, thank you very much. I mean, you're really a rock star in sales enablement, and what you've done and put together is quite impressive. And thank you for sharing it.
Well, thanks so much. I'm honored to be here.
All right. And
Bye,
for those of
everybody.
you on the call, just a last statement. We did record this. We'll be sending you a link to the recording and that first overview chart of Jerry's by this time next week. All right. Thanks again,
Perfect.
everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye, Jerry.
Bye, Nancy.
Bye.